Within every culture there is a story. The roots of hobo culture can be found deep throughout American history. Originated in the 1860s when the Civil War ended, hobos became a part of the American culture until the 1940s, when the amount of hobos began to decrease. Hobos were defined as migratory workers or homeless vagabonds who started off their lives as discharged veterans, hopping on freight trains when they were on their way home or looking for jobs along American frontiers, following railways west aboard the freight trains in the late 19th century.
Circumstances started changing. Prices started dropping, and debts started rising. There was a major banking crisis, serious policy mistakes of the Federal Reserve Board, and with the stock market crash in October 1929, the country was thrown into the Great Depression. Businesses were forced to lay off city workers by the minute, and when homeowners were unable to pay taxes or mortgages, they lost their property.
The 1929 stock market crash was not the only event that led America to an economic depression. The Dust Bowl was another factor. It was a product of decades of mismanaged farming techniques that created a drought that dehydrated the topsoil. Eventually, the Southwest and Midwest eroded into massive dust storms that ruined the farming land even further. This caused many farming families to relocate, and many of them found themselves to be unemployed. Job loss put millions of Americans out of work and onto the streets.
While the Dust Bowl hurt the farming population, the Depression affected people in the city, forcing businesses to lay off workers by the minute and farmers to move away from the rural parts of the country.
Hoping for better lives, hobos traveled with any type of possessions they could carry with them. Railroads were the most common form of transportation for hobos because of the $3 million loans provided by the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which enabled trains to keep running. Railroads offered a way for hobos to experience adventures, seek new opportunities, and escape poverty from homes. For others who did not have any kind of transportation, hitchhiking as well as stealing a ride by hopping on a freight train was also common. In order to hitch a free ride on the top of a freight train to travel around, these hobos will go to the local freight train yard, where someone will hoist them up onto the top of a boxcar. At that time, a caboose of a train was known as the accommodation car, and a fast train was called a cannonball. Experienced hobos taught novices their skills, showing them which engines were ready to hitch up to train cars and how to flip, in order to board on a moving train or to catch a train on the fly, which is a dangerous undertaking without getting hurt. If they did not find empty boxcars, the teenage hobos would occasionally ride on top of freight trains. One hobo from Michigan, Elton Finney, had said, "From then on we kept learning from others. One of the first things that we learned was how to catch a boxcar, and not to be pulled under the wheels." Another hobo from Pennsylvania, Luther S. Head, had also said, "To be a hobo, you had to know how to get on the train while it's moving." Some hobos got killed by trying to get on trains that were moving too fast.
Hobos regarded the freight train services as their main means of transportation, which in turn constituted for their survival. But as they traveled from one location to the next in search of jobs, they ended up forming a community along the way. Examples of hobo communities were the hobo jungles. The hobo jungles were located close to the railroads in tall grasses and weeds, which in turn became easy means of accessibility for hobos. The jungles were places where hobos could gather to eat and sleep together.
During the Great Depression, over 250,000 young men left their homes in hope and desperation to search for jobs. Most of these young men were around the ages of 16 to 25. With the thousands of businesses that failed and the scores of schools that closed, jobs in reality were unavailable to this wandering young generation. If hobos weren't looking for jobs to support their families, which a great deal of them were, they left home to escape poverty, abusive families, or simply for the thrill of adventure. These drifters often found work at farms where they picked fruit and vegetables, while others traveled across the country in search of jobs at construction, mining, timber, and agricultural industries. In 1935, the Civilian Conservation Corps provided employment for more than 500,000 young men. The program was set up not only to provide jobs for the unemployed, but also to relieve the male heads of the household who struggled to find jobs during the Great Depression. During this time, hobos were also employed under the Works Progress Administration, a New Deal agency, to work in public projects such as constructing public buildings and roads. These New Deal programs helped some hobos find work when all other options were gone.
Not only were hobos required to follow proper hobo etiquette, but society's laws as well, just like any other citizen. Yet, as the number of transients, hobos who worked for short periods of time, accumulated, America viewed it as a problem that required the assistance from the bureaucratic forces. By April 5, 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt established the Civilian Conservation Corps as a government relief project that is part of the New Deal. The CCC provided employment for approximately 3 million men, many of whom may have resorted to a life of crime if not taking part in the relief project. From 1933 to 1942, CCC enrollees built roads, strung telephone wires, erected fire towers, and planted approximately 3 billion trees. The CCC workers earned $30 per month, $25 to send back home to their families, and $5 for spending money. By 1935, the program provided employment for more than 500,000 young men, with over 2,650 camps in operation in 48 states. Recalling his time enrolled in the CCC, Arthur Goldsmith stated, "After being inducted into the CCC in May 1903, I spent 1 year in a beautiful area near Idabel, Oklahoma, 10 miles from Arkansas and 10 miles from Texas. We built roads and bridges, planted trees, and fought forest fires." Tom Clark of Seattle, Washington also stated, "I worked at any job I could find to earn my keep. Farmhand, gandy dancer, quarryman, logger, sawmill hand, dishwasher, woodcutter, and berry picker. For any time I even sponged off my friends and relatives before enrolling in FDR CCC, where I became a company clerk and received training." The CCC can be seen as the most important New Deal due to it providing jobs to hobos during the Depression.
Not all hobos were lucky enough to receive job offers after they have traveled all the way to the West in search of new opportunities, which caused most wanderers to be just as destitute as they were when they started out on their journey. In California, many wanderers ended up finding seasonal jobs at fruit ranches or canneries, apply for relief, or panhandle and beg for food. Before the U.S. government instituted its welfare system in 1935, religious organizations such as churches, missions, and the Salvation Army often provided the only indoor locations where tramps and hobos could get hot meals, sleeping quarters, and clothing. Many missions had a mode of feed and comfort. If hobos accepted the mission's charity, they were obliged to work for their food and sit through sermons, no matter how long.
During the Great Depression, writers, photographers, songwriters, and filmmakers brought the travels and hardships of hobos to light. To document the economic ailments that spearheaded to the Great Depression, the U.S. government appointed a group of photographers from the Information Division of the Farm Security Administration. These photographers, such as Gordon Parks, John Vachon, and Walker Evans, captured the dismal moments of hobos from 1935 to 1943. In the beginning of the 1930s, the media celebrated hobos for their love of freedom and adventure on the road. Many confined their wanderings to wide-open spaces, since they were known to be traveling alongside roads, thus illustrating their association with independence and thrill in their travels. However, Depression-era accounts of tramping and hobos soon emphasized not the romance of freedom and adventure, but the bleak reality of life of the American hobo. There were various films in the 1930s that portrayed hobos as vagrant, homeless people who encounter adversities throughout their journeys. One noteworthy portrayal of hobos was Warner Bros. Studios' Wild Boys of the Road, a film about two teenage boys, Tommy Gordon and Eddie Smith, who both left their homes and looked for jobs to ease the burden on their families due to the economic afflictions of the Great Depression. Warner Bros. Studios produced this movie to prevent young people from riding the rails, since hopping on freight trains was common for hobos at the time. Warner Bros. Studios sent their message by displaying the hardships that Tommy and Eddie go through in their journey, such as when Tommy's leg was being mangled by an oncoming train, and when they were living in Sewer Pipe City before getting ousted by city authorities. This depiction of hobo life was tested in the 1997 documentary Riding the Rails, which offered perspectives from teenage hobos on the presumed romanticism of traveling on the railroad during the Great Depression. The film dispelled the romantic myths of a hobo's life and its mask of freedom and adventure, recalling painful experiences of now elderly survivors of the rails. These survivors remembered miserable memories such as homesickness, being suffocated by train smoke, not knowing where and if they could find jobs, sleeping in jails, and avoiding bulls. Renee Champion, one of the survivors, recalled the lonely feeling he felt when traveling in wide open spaces, asserting that some of the worst feelings of loneliness that he has ever experienced in his life were in situations like this. Through accounts of a hobo's methods for survival and accounts of somber miseries, melancholies, imprisonments, deaths, and dispossessions, Riding the Rails uncovered the true portrayal of the Great Depression's hobos, wanderers who were forced to travel more by economic urgency, food, and work than the romantic spirit of adventure. After the stock market crash of 1929 sent a great deal of Americans out of work, people drastically changed their lives to survive the financial crisis. They became a genuine testament of American culture, hardworking, independent, and determined. In the beginning of the Great Depression, hobos came about because there was a scarcity of employment and they needed to search for jobs to support themselves and their families. So these hobos traveled by trains in search of work and hoped to find food and shelter along the way. With their employment in the CCC and WPA, these hobos built up the nation's infrastructures and contributed significantly in progressing society. From their hardships to their survival to their several contributions to society, hobos created a culture that defined America and its brutal reality during the 1930s.